All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is John Girardi. I'm the director here at Right to Life of Central California. And we're doing just this little mini educational conference today. 1 year after Roe, what parents and educators need to know. So thank you all so much for coming. We're going to be recording all these talks and making them available on YouTube. So last year on June 24th, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. And it was a really momentous thing, obviously, and I'll talk a little bit about that so you all kind of understand the impact of that 1 year on. But the other thing that we've really sort of noticed in our work is the way in which the abortion industry is, and especially the pro-abortion movement in California, is kind of trying to separate parents from children, is trying to intervene into parental authority and trying to, in various different kinds of ways, sort of insert itself into the parent-child relationship. And they're doing that through a number of means. There's a lot of stuff that's being done through how public schools are being mandated to educate students within sex ed curricula and to include instruction on abortion as a legitimate form of birth control, but beyond just letting them know about abortion, it's letting them know where to go to get abortions, facilitating children on public school time going to get abortions. So there's a lot of ways in which the pro-abortion movement in California is trying to push itself in between parents and children within the context of public schools. Also, with the proliferation of the abortion pill, this is another way in which sort of the state, or in which the abortion industry is sort of trying to circumvent parents. The abortion pill is basically a method of performing abortion and is in fact the most common method of performing abortion. This is not the morning after pill. This is a series, this is a 2-drug series that's taken over the course of 48 to 72 hours, basically designed more or less to induce an artificial miscarriage up to 10 weeks into a pregnancy. And because it's in the form of a pill, and because President Biden, his FDA, deregulated the abortion pill to allow it to be shipped through the mail, this is a way in which abortion is being made more accessible to people, allowing abortions to happen without having to go to a clinic. And that's why I think this topic is so important, because I think so many pro-lifers still think about abortion as like a surgical procedure that you go into a doctor's office and have a procedure. I think we're thinking about a D&C, abortion dilation and curettage, or a D&E, a dilation and extraction abortion. Those are not anymore the most common ways of performing abortions. Now the abortion pill is the most common way of performing abortions. About 53% of all abortions nationwide are done via the abortion pill. And a lot of that is because of how Democratic presidential administrations and their FDAs have taken away regulations on the abortion pill. And that's such an important thing now. Between legal means of obtaining abortion pills and illegal websites, the abortion pill is more accessible than ever. And it's more accessible to children than ever. And when we get to kind of my California specific sections of our presentation today, I'll talk a little bit about how the California state legislature has been manipulating health insurance to basically facilitate kids getting abortions without their parents knowing and having their parents' own insurance pay for it. So stay tuned for that. So to talk with us a little bit about the abortion pill, I got sort of a national expert on the subject. Her name is Melanie Israel, and she is with the Heritage Foundation, which is a wonderful think tank based in Washington, D.C. Melanie has done a lot of work on the abortion topic, and specifically produced a really excellent series of writings regarding the abortion pill, the history of its regulation, and how it came to the United States in the year 2000 under President Clinton. And there has been a lot of activity surrounding the abortion pill. Specifically this year, there's a major lawsuit, a federal lawsuit that's going on in the Northern District of Texas, challenging the legality of the FDA's original approval of the abortion pill in the year 2000, And many of the subsequent decisions by different presidents to take away some of the health and safety restrictions around abortion, particularly President Obama's move in 2016 to remove a lot of health and safety restrictions, and President Biden's moves in 2021, 2022 to remove some of those restrictions. So without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce to us via Zoom Melanie Israel from the Heritage Foundation. So give her a big round of applause.
Thank you so much for that. I'll go ahead and say good morning. It's technically good afternoon here where I am in Maryland. So yeah, John did a fantastic job kind of setting this up. I want to be sure that we understand why it's so important that we get into the regulatory history of how did we even get here in the first place, because we have to understand how all of these structures work if we're going to know what to do to push back against the abortion pill, not just in the states, but at the federal level, hopefully with the next conservative administration. So I'm going to start out, first of all, by setting the stage of what these pills are, why they're so much of a problem, and then we'll move into that history, how they came to be, the approval process, this tangled web of all of these different organizations who were working to bring these pills to the market, not just in the US, but across the world. And then we'll talk a little bit about the specific regulatory structures at the FDA. I promise I won't make it too dry and boring because it is really, really important. It matters. And we're going to talk about what's been happening in recent years. And we'll talk about the policy impact, not just in the states, but in the hostile administration with President Biden, but what this really means too in a post-Roe landscape when we're dealing more with a patchwork of laws through all of the different states. And of course, we'll talk about what next and what do we do about this massive, massive problem. So as John has already touched on, the FDA originally approved the abortion pill in 2000. You've probably heard it referred to as different things. It's called mifepristone. The brand name is Mifeprex. It's also been called RU486. That was the name of the compound. That drug, mifepristone, is the abortion pill. It's the first of two drugs that a woman typically takes in the abortion pill regimen. So mifepristone works by blocking the uterus from receiving a hormone called progesterone. This is a hormone that is necessary to sustain a pregnancy. And so when mifepristone is blocking that hormone, the unborn child, of course, can't get that nourishment that he or she needs, and it causes the child to die. And then after about 2 days or so, a woman takes a second drug called misoprostol that causes uterine contractions to empty the child from the uterus. And that drug, that one is not what we're really talking to when we talk about the abortion pill, but it's being used off-label in this context. That second drug is actually a stomach ulcer medicine, but it's used off-label to cause these uterine contractions. And in fact, some women are probably familiar with it because it can also be used during the labor induction process. But again, that's an off-label usage for this drug. So back to mifepristone, the abortion pill, it has a complication rate that is 4 times the rate of complications for a surgical abortion. And it's got a lot of really serious side effects. In any chemical abortion, a woman is going to go through intense cramping and bleeding. That is the nature of what we're talking about. But she's also probably going to experience fever, nausea, vomiting, chills, or even more serious side effects can happen like hemorrhage. It can suppress your immune system. It could cause sepsis. And what we know of at the FDA with their admittedly not great reporting system, which we'll get into in a little bit, there's been 28 deaths associated with the abortion pill, thousands and thousands of serious adverse events. So those are things that, may have required hospitalization or a blood transfusion. And unfortunately, despite all of that, the use of the abortion pill has increased over 120% in the past decade. As we had said earlier, this pill was originally approved back in 2000. But it wasn't until more recently that we really started seeing its usage skyrocket. And we'll talk about that when we get into the regulatory process. Today, more than half of abortions are done with abortion pills. And we are actually just starting to get data out of some states where it is higher than 60%. So as John had already touched on, when we talk about abortion, so often people are thinking of a brick and mortar clinic, a surgical procedure. And the reality is, most of the time when we talk about abortion, that's not really what is actually happening anymore. It's these pill-induced abortions where women are going through all of this by themselves, alone, at home, in a hotel room, in a dorm room, without any kind of, doctor or healthcare provider even being present. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. Abortion pills are the single greatest threat to pro-life progress in a post-Roe world, the single greatest threat. And that's because we've got bad actors domestically and internationally who are shipping these pills through the mail. They are sending these pills from pro-abortion states into pro-life states. Women are taking these pills even if they've got other existing conditions where they shouldn't be taking these pills. So it is a massive, massive problem. Obviously, it kills an unborn child, but these pills also hurt women too. And the abortion industry is absolutely relentless in pressuring the FDA to remove all of the existing safety protocols. And they've been doing that as part of a really, really well-organized process for the past several decades. And ultimately, their goal, again, this is not hyperbole, they want these pills to be available over the counter. Over the counter. That is something that they're very open in saying now. They're saying the quiet part out loud now. So to kind of rewind, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got here, what the abortion pill approval process was like, because it's really important that we understand how we got here so that hopefully, again, with a conservative administration, with progress in the states, we can try to roll back some of the gains that the pro-abortion side has made with these dangerous pills. So we want history to be our guide. Our movement needs to understand the warning signs. The pro-life movement needs to understand how the FDA works so that we can have a game plan to do something about this. So we are now going to rewind all the way back to the early 1980s. The chemical abortion compound was originally discovered in France by a scientist in the early 1980s, and the abortion pill became available in France all the way back in 1988. And maybe somewhat surprisingly, opposition all around the world was pretty swift. A lot of people did not want an abortion pill to exist at all. There was a German company that was a major shareholder of this French company, and they were very concerned about the threat of boycotts and the effect that this abortion pill could have on all of these other drugs that they sold. They didn't want anything to affect their bottom line. So basically what you had was this big German parent company telling the smaller French company, pull the drug from the market. We do not want to be associated with this. Now, due to some really complicated legal wranglings that I won't even begin to get into, essentially what was able to happen is that the government of France was able to step in and force that French company to continue distributing the abortion pill. So this was all happening by the late 80s. Meanwhile, in the United States, pro-abortion groups and researchers were trying to find a pharmaceutical company that would be willing to go through the whole FDA approval process in the United States. But because this was such a controversial drug, people were worried about boycotts. It's a very expensive process to bring a new drug to market. Nobody in the United States was stepping up due to all of this controversy. However, in 1994, all of a sudden, this French company agreed to license the abortion pill to a group called the Population Council at no cost. So we need to remember the name of this group, the Population Council. They are the ones who went on to find a manufacturer, to find a distributor, and sponsored that whole FDA approval process. And there's a lot more to the story, because this French company didn't license the drug out of the goodness of their heart. There was actually a lot going on during the Clinton administration behind the scenes. So what happened is that when President Clinton took office, one of his very first acts was to instruct HHS to try to bring the abortion pill to market in the United States. We've all seen it before. When a new president takes office there in January, there's the flurry of all of the executive orders and appointing people to different positions in the administration. And that really underscores what a priority this was for President Clinton and his administration. One of those very first January actions was to instruct HHS to bring this drug to market. And so the Clinton administration actually worked hand in hand with that French company and the Population Council, basically acting as a middleman, arranging this relationship. And ultimately, they were successful. Again, in 1994, that is when the Population Council announced that they were going to get this drug from the French company for free. So in 1996, the Population Council submitted that new drug application to the FDA. They set up a company called Danco Laboratories to be in charge of manufacturing and distributing the abortion pill. And I know I'm throwing all of these different names out here. What you really need to know is that these groups, Population Council, Danco, they're all part of a web of organizations that are connected to each other. And unsurprisingly, there's a lot of other organizations connected to them as well. Planned Parenthood, the usual suspects of these liberal foundations, that you'll probably recognize: Buffett, Packard, Soros. They were all part of this tangled web of groups connected to the Population Council, helping with this funding to bring this drug to market in the United States. Now, the FDA drug approval process is pretty long. It requires all kinds of things: clinical trials, multiple review cycles, and a lot of the slowdown was because Danco had a very difficult time actually finding a manufacturer to physically make these pills. Again, a lot of these companies in the United States were simply not interested in being an abortion pill manufacturer. What they ultimately had to do was go all the way to China to be able to find somebody who could make these pills. Now, we don't know exactly where these pills are being manufactured today. The FDA does not release that information despite FOIA requests. We kind of anecdotally hear that it's happening in Europe now, not China. But anyway, that difficulty finding a manufacturer was part of why it took so long for this drug to be approved. However, eventually in September 2000 is when the FDA gave that approval for the abortion pill. They approved mifepristone at the time through 7 weeks gestation. And so that's kind of the history of the approval process. But what we also need to get into to understand the landscape we're working with today are the heightened safety protocols that have always been applied to abortion pills. It's called, today, it's called a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, or REMS, REMS for short. And right now, there are 64 drugs on the market that are subject to different sorts of REMS. So basically, these are heightened protocols that the FDA applies to certain drugs to ensure that the benefits outweigh the risks. So with the abortion pill, these restrictions were initially pretty significant. Back in 2000, some of these restrictions meant that only a physician could give the pill in person to a woman, and she would have to take that pill in the presence of that doctor. The woman would have to do an in-person follow-up so that they could make sure that the abortion process was complete, that she wasn't experiencing any complications, and that physician had to report serious adverse events to Danco. And anyone who wanted to prescribe the abortion pill had to basically do an opt-in process where they got certified by Danco so that they could be distributing these pills. Because again, the abortion pill was never set up to be prescribed by anybody and just picked up at your local pharmacy. So because of those safety restrictions, basically abortion pills were pretty much limited to abortion clinics like your Planned Parenthoods. Rank and file family physicians and OBGYNs were not clamoring to go get certification to become abortion pill distributors. Now, in 2016, towards the end of his presidency, the Obama administration weakened those protocols. It was really significant. One of the things they did, they said that the woman no longer had to take that first pill in the presence of a physician, and she no longer had to do that in-person follow-up appointment to make sure that everything was okay. They did away with the requirement that only physicians can prescribe these pills, and they raised the limit of when these pills could be used from 7 weeks to 10 weeks. And this is really important because the risk of complications and the likelihood that the pill doesn't work increases the farther along in pregnancy you're taking it. And they also started requiring that only deaths be reported to the manufacturer rather than all of those serious events. So you can kind of see the writing on the wall of what's happening here. They were slowly eroding the opportunity for women to have any sort of medical supervision during these chemical abortions, and they stopped collecting data on the complications. So fast forward to the Biden administration, specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the administration used it as an excuse to further weaken these safety protocols. So they did away with that in-person dispensing requirement entirely. So that officially sanctioned things like abortion pills being sent through the mail, telemedicine consultations where a woman is never even seen in person by a doctor at all. And they started a process to allow retail pharmacies to be certified to dispense abortion pills. Again, remember, the situation had always been that somebody has to affirmatively opt in to dispensing these pills and obtain them directly from Danco to then give to women. Now there is a process for retail pharmacies like Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid to also be able to go through that process and ultimately dispense abortion pills. So all that's to say, what exactly is the problem with these weakened safety protocols? Why does it matter that they've slowly been chipping away at basically what we would think of as a line of defense? We have to remember that it is impossible, 100% impossible for somebody prescribing these pills who might not even be in the same town, let alone the same state, to talk to a woman on a video chat and rule out something like ectopic pregnancy. If you don't have an ultrasound, you can't verify that you don't have an ectopic pregnancy. There's no screening question that can possibly replace an in-person evaluation in this context. Why does that matter? Well, an ectopic pregnancy, if left untreated, can rupture and kill a woman. That can be a fatal complication if it's not caught in time, and time is really of the essence. And beyond that, beyond ectopic pregnancy, a person prescribing an abortion pill during a video chat can't possibly accurately date a pregnancy without there being an ultrasound. So this means that more women now might be prescribed an abortion pill well past that 70-day cutoff. We already know that more than half of women can be off in recalling the date of their last menstrual period to try to date pregnancy. They can be off by 1 week, 2 weeks, or even more. You have to have an ultrasound to be able to accurately date a pregnancy. And that's why a woman's very first appointment after she's pregnant is to have an ultrasound with her doctor to find out what that actual due date is going to be. And remember, these abortion pill complications increase the farther along in pregnancy that a woman is. And to rewind a little bit more, thinking about the human impact of all of this, thinking about what an in-home do-it-yourself abortion means for a woman who might be facing coercion, or threats from an unsupportive partner, an abuser, a human trafficker. Our friends at the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs have written about this extensively, and have talked about how a visit with a doctor in early pregnancy, that one-on-one interaction, is often the only chance that some women are going to have to be able to expose that pressure or that coercion that they might be facing. And so when we are doing away completely with that opportunity for face-to-face interaction, more women are going to be coerced or forced to take these pills. So when we start talking about the policy impact of all of this, I do want to note that there's been some bright spots along the way. As the FDA over the years has slowly weakened these protocols, some states did respond to say that in our state, you can't do telemedicine abortion. In our state, we're still going to require, reporting requirements on complications, things like that. So that was a bright spot. Admittedly, it wasn't all of the states, but it was a good number of them. It was better than nothing, I guess I should say. And even prior to Roe being overturned, the number of abortion clinics and the number of abortions had been declining. But when you kind of put all of these abortion numbers on a graph and look at them over time, you can see that these increases, that the changes in what we were seeing with abortion numbers coincided with abortion pill deregulation. Their increased availability, the broader network of people who can prescribe them, we started seeing those numbers creep up because brick and mortar clinic numbers doesn't matter so much anymore. And unfortunately, while the data is still obviously preliminary, we're only a year out from Roe being overturned, we do know that abortion pills are unfortunately muting the effects of pro-life laws, even in those states with very strong laws protecting life. And to be clear, it's not eliminating the gains that we've been seeing of lives saved after Roe was overturned, and we should celebrate each and every one of those lives who have been saved. Unfortunately, because of abortion pill deregulation, it could be better though, and it's not because of these abortion pills. So all that said, we need to know what the abortion industry wants to do next and what the next move is in their playbook. They've been very upfront for a long, long time saying that they want to do away with the REMS entirely. That would mean that abortion pills would be treated like any other prescription drug, where anyone could prescribe it. You could pick it up at a pharmacy anywhere without those heightened safety protocols that we currently have. But that's not all. They don't just want to do away with that REMS system. They want to make these abortion pills available over the counter. They want somebody to be able to walk into any pharmacy, any grocery store, pick up an abortion pill with your makeup and your cough drops. That is ultimately what their vision is. And of course, no age restrictions on any of this. They have no problem with a minor obtaining an abortion pill without their parent ever knowing. And again, they also want to blur the line between abortion and contraception. There is an effort to try to rebrand these pills as quote unquote missed period pills. And basically what that means is that a woman would take this abortion pill that's been rebranded without ever taking a pregnancy test to kickstart her cycle. Again, this is all part of a broader effort to make these pills, just as common as taking a Tylenol, nobody ever thinking about what the actual effects could be if you're pregnant. And unfortunately, during the Trump administration, not enough was done at the FDA to try to fight these pills. Now, to be fair, it is a lot to expect a couple of political appointees to go up against a whole wall of these career officials. And obviously, the COVID pandemic was diverting a lot of attention. So what this means is that the next administration has to get serious about fighting abortion pills. That means we need to have more oversight at the FDA. We need to stop allowing these pro-abortion organizations to do their clinical trials. Some of these are happening at universities right there in California. We need to demand better data collection on complications. You can see how it worked. The abortion industry was able to remove the data collection components so that they could turn around and say, you need to remove these safety restrictions. We don't have any reports of complications. And of course, it's because their previous step was to do away with complication reports. And again, to really drive this point home, these pills are dangerous. They kill babies, they hurt women. And pro-life states can only do so much. We've got a patchwork of laws. These pills are flowing freely through the mail, and we've got a hostile Senate and a hostile administration. So really, as far as public policy goes, there's only so much that we can do right now. But beyond the public policy, this also kind of underscores what that other component of the pro-life movement is. We've probably all heard that beautiful quote over the years about how the pro-life movement's goal is to see the day that every person is protected in law and welcomed in life. So making abortion unthinkable and unnecessary. And that is where every single one of us can play a role. We all might not be experts in things like the Comstock Act or FDA regulations, but every single one of us can pitch in at our local pregnancy center. We can demand that our elected officials protect life, and we can speak up for the most vulnerable. One of the things that's going to be critical in the fight going forward is making sure women know that abortion pill reversal might be an option for her. There have already been thousands of babies saved by abortion pill reversal. So that's one of the many bright spots that we have to look towards. I hope that in talking about all of this and regulations and the approval process hasn't caused everybody's eyes to just completely glaze over. But I promise it is so, so important that we understand how this all happened, because that's how we figure out the game plan to fight these abortion pills moving forward.
Well, everyone, let's give a big round of applause for Melanie. That was really great. I remember Melanie wrote a big, long paper with a lot of this information about it on the history of abortion pill deregulate, how it became approved and deregulated back in, I think, 2021. And I almost fell over reading it, especially to read the history about how basically Democrat administrations work like busy little beavers to get the abortion pill approved and deregulate it. And then you have 8 years of nothing under George W. Bush, effectively, and 4 years of nothing under Donald Trump, unfortunately. So, Melanie, we had one question come in. I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but was there any testing of the abortion pill in combination with other kinds of either drugs or factors or dangerous interactions that might have been found, like in conjunction with like aspartame or caffeine, or what kind of testing was done on the safety of the abortion pill, maybe prior to its FDA approval or over the course of its lifespan as an approved drug in the U.S.?
Yeah, this is really important. And it kind of ties into the lawsuit that people might be familiar with right now, where a group of doctors are actually challenging the FDA, saying that it should have never approved the abortion pill in the first place. And we hope that that case is eventually going to make its way to the Supreme Court. During the approval process, the FDA did require some clinical trials. Unfortunately, what they were able to do was rely on some clinical trials from other countries. They have the ability to waive certain requirements. One of the things that they waived was looking at the effects of the drug specifically in the adolescent population, of how this affects minors versus how it affects adults. We do know that the abortion pill is contraindicated in some contexts, specifically things like different heart conditions, things like that. So I guess that's to say it's a little bit of a mixed bag. We do know that there are some cases where these pills shouldn't be used, and that's clear. However, we also know that historically at the FDA, they haven't been all that concerned about it. For example, in the context of ectopic pregnancy, it can put a woman in a horrible situation if she's taking this drug when she has an ectopic pregnancy, or if she's at a heightened risk for ectopic pregnancy. And so there's a little bit of talking out of both sides of their mouth in that sense.
Right. So probably not super thoroughly vetted, like in combination with other. And since
Right.
2016, we've been collecting almost no adverse effects reporting
Exactly.
for anything short of
Exactly.
death.
That's what so much of the problem is that because of how these pills have been deregulated and you've removed that in-person component, those in-person follow-ups, those reporting requirements, a woman who takes this pill and then has a complication, she's not going back to the Planned Parenthood clinic. She's going to an emergency room where the abortion providers are telling women, if you have to go to the ER, tell them you're having a miscarriage. Don't tell them
Right.
that you're having an abortion. And of course, then the abortion provider never hears about the complication that a woman suffers. It never gets reported. The ER doctors aren't aware that she's even induced an abortion herself. They don't know how to report these things. And so you can see how it turns into basically a black hole of information.
So what little we do have is probably just the tip of the iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg is
Exactly.
pretty bad.
And it's important to know the little that we do have. We can look at things like Medicaid data. There's been publications come out showing that after abortion pills are approved, emergency room visits skyrocket. And that is something that from the limited data that we have, it is well documented that once you have those abortion pills, more and more and more women go to the emergency room with complications.
Okay. All right. Well, do you have any other questions? Yeah, Ermelinda? Right. Mhm. I'm getting a question, Melanie. Melanie, so the question I'm getting from the audience is, do we have demographic breakdowns based on age and race as far as who is primarily getting chemical abortions?
You know, that's a great question. What we can do is look at the CDC's annual abortion surveillance report to try to get some of this information. Unfortunately, the CDC collects data from the states on a voluntary basis, and not every state collects information segmented
The
like
biggest
that.
hole being California. California doesn't
Exactly,
report
one
its
of those
data.
big holes. And my state where I am right now, Maryland, is one of those. You've got three that don't report anything at all, and two of them are California and Maryland, where a lot of abortions happen. So the data that we have is not great, but it does exist. We know that most abortions are happening in the first trimester. Most abortions are these chemical abortion pills. And so you don't necessarily see a whole lot of difference when you start getting into the demographics, other than kind of generally what we see with abortions more broadly, that it's
Right.
primarily happening in really my age group, you know, women in their 20s, early 30s, a lot of women who already have a child. And we see a lot of that in both chemical abortions and surgical
Right.
abortions.
And it is disproportionate. So basically, the chemical abortion demographics are not that much different from general abortion demographics. So it's still
Right.
disproportionately minority communities, disproportionate percentage of African Americans, disproportionate percentage of Latinos relative to their share of the population.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Right. Right.
yes, one other question. Yeah. So the question is, are there other drugs that have sort of similar complication rates where the FDA is maintaining higher levels of restrictions and reporting requirements that we can sort of point to show kind of how inconsistent the FDA is being?
It's a really good question. It's hard to say because of these 64 drugs right now that have a REMS requirement on them, they're all so different in what their functions are. A lot of them are things like, cancer drugs. If you're undergoing chemotherapy, you have to make absolute sure that you're not taking other drugs with that. And so, because the abortion pill is so unique in its function of what it's doing, it's really hard to drive some of those comparisons, unfortunately. And I feel like I keep coming back to this point that our data collection to begin with is so insufficient when we're dealing with these abortion pills. And so anytime we try to start diving into the data and demonstrating these comparisons, it makes it all the more difficult because we're not doing a good job of collecting it in the first place to even begin to start making these different comparisons. So I wish I could give an even better concrete answer on that, but unfortunately, the kind of comparing it to a black hole is pretty accurate in some ways.
There was one more question.
Sound of Freedom, has it impacted the pro-life movement in a positive way?
I don't know if that's. I don't know if Melanie can speak to that. I mean, I know a lot of pro-lifers. Yeah. So the question was whether the movie *The Sound of Freedom* has impacted the pro-life movement in a positive way. I mean, I know I've seen a lot of pro-lifers see it. I mean, it's been out for a week, so results may be preliminary. But I mean, I know it's made people, quite jazzed. So. Yeah, I think it's been good.
I can give a shameless plug for those of you. I haven't been able to see it yet, but I talked to my mom last night. She had just seen it, and she's telling me I need to see it. But we, at the Heritage Foundation, we had the opportunity to host a screening for it and do some podcast interviews with the folks who did the movie. So if you're interested in some of those interviews or behind the scenes information, shameless plug. We've got that for you, heritage.org or our partner organization, the Daily Signal.
Okay, wonderful. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is her paper available as a PDF on either your website or hers?
Yeah, the question was asked, your paper from 2021 about sort of the history of, where can people find that or make that available? We can provide, I can pull it up probably during the next talk and provide the link for any of you guys who are interested. But maybe Melanie, you can plug your work at Heritage if you'd like.
Yes, absolutely. So if you go to heritage.org, we have a drop-down menu of all of the different issues that we cover at Heritage, and one of those is life. And so if you click there, you'll be able to access all of our publications, the in-depth papers and backgrounders and legal memos, the shorter commentaries that we do for places like Daily Signal and other news outlets. So you can access all of that information through heritage.org. We've got the long, comprehensive paper about chemical abortion. We've also got a really helpful one diving into abortion data, specifically looking at places like Planned Parenthood, the Guttmacher Institute, groups like that. So many resources there on heritage.org just by going to that issue section and clicking on life.
Okay, and we'll specifically get it for folks. Yeah, Ermelinda? Yeah. So again, so is use of the pill more prevalent within specific minority communities? Yeah, so I think it would be, if you're looking at which minority communities are most disproportionately having abortions, and again, the stats are pretty much the same for the abortion pill versus all forms of abortion. I think it's most prevalent within African American community, most disproportionately prevalent in the African American community, and then I think after that it's Latinos where it's slightly less prevalent. Again, I don't know if you have any more specific demographic info
Yeah,
like that on
that's
abortion generally.
generally speaking, that's kind of the best that we can do. Again, part of that is because some states simply aren't breaking down this demographic information as detailed as we would like, or they're just simply collecting data differently. So it's hard to make kind of these broad sweeping conclusions, but that is a lot of what we're seeing. But I also have to note that the more these get deregulated, the easier it's going to be for younger people to get these pills, specifically minors getting a hold of these pills without their parents knowing, young women who are going off to college and getting these pills. And so I think from the limited data, we are going to continue seeing its usage go up in those younger age brackets.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, Melanie, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you, and we're going to try and share some of your comments and information with a broader group of our supporters. And anyway, we just so appreciate having you on, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
All right.
so much. And thanks to every one of you for being here today as well.
Okay, thanks.